Eclipse season is back. And this month, we're getting two of them, a total lunar eclipse turning the moon a haunting blood moon red, and just 2 weeks later, a partial solar eclipse. And as if that weren't enough, the Milky Way core is making its grand return just in time for the March equinox. Hello, and welcome to the Space Guide. This is your monthly look at what's going on in the night sky and beyond. I'm Sarah Matthews, and I'm an astrophotographer, and I wanted to thank all of you for the outpouring amount of support for this series. It really means a lot since I'm trying something new, and if you would like to share more feedback or input, feel free to leave those down in the comments. And without further ado, grab a snack and let's get into it. I think in general, most people really like the moon, and I also think that in general, most people probably like pi. Well, you're in for a treat because this month we have a total lunar eclipse on March 13th through March 14th, which also just happens to be Pi Day. So on the night of March 13th into the early hours of March 14th, we'll get to see a full worm moon and a total lunar eclipse. Now this is the first total lunar eclipse of 2025, and during the peak, called totality, the moon is going to turn this deep reddish color. And that's why people call it a blood moon. It's not actually blood, but it is a really stunning sight, and you're not going to want to miss it. So what's really going on when a total lunar eclipse happens? Well, essentially, the sun, the earth, and the moon are lined up perfectly in a straight line, and the sun doing what it does best is, shining its light across space, just like a kind of a giant spotlight, and then the earth is right in the middle, blocking some of that sunlight, which creates a really big shadow out in space. So the moon, which moves right into that shadow, which is what we see as the eclipse. But what's really cool is that instead of turning completely dark, the moon turns this reddish orange color. And the reason is because some of the sun's light bends across the edges of Earth through its atmosphere. So the blue light gets scattered away, which is why, our sky is blue during the day, but the red light passes through and hits the moon. This does make the moon glow red or orange, just like what you would see during a sunrise or a sunset. And that's why we call it the blood moon. So there are kind of three different phases of a lunar eclipse. The penumbral phase, which is when the moon enters into the outer edge of Earth's shadow, and it looks a little bit dimmer. It's pretty easy to miss if you're not paying attention. And then we have the partial phase, and that's where you'll see a dark curve slowly covering the moon. And then we have totality, and this is the main event. The entire moon is covered by Earth's shadow, and it turns this eerie reddish color, which we talked about, and it lasts about an hour. So who's going to have the best view? Well, the total lunar eclipse will be visible from a lot of different places on Earth and different phases, of course, as well. So, for example, North and South America, you'll be able to see the full show starting late on March 13th and continuing into the early hours of March 14th. So if you're on the east coast of the US, the eclipse is going to begin at 11:57 p.m. Eastern Time on March 13th, and it's going to reach totality at 2:26 a.m. Eastern Time, ending at 3:31 a.m. Eastern Time on March 14th. If you're on the western parts of Europe and Africa, you can catch the eclipse in the early morning hours of March 14th, with totality happening just before sunrise. Now, even if you're outside of these areas, you still might be able to catch a partial eclipse or the penumbral phase. Now, I would recommend checking out timeanddate.com to see what parts of the lunar eclipse that you can see from your exact location and the timing. You can also check out Sky Safari or Stellarium, which are planetarium apps that you can download to your phone or to your desktop. And then, of course, NASA's Eclipse website is going to be another great resource to check out. I'm going to try my best to live stream the event if weather permits, so I will probably be sending out that link on my social media channels once I kind of figure that out. I do have those down below. Now, if you're wanting to photograph this event, I would highly recommend that you give it a shot if you have clear skies, or even if you don't have clear skies, it's still really cool. This is a picture that I took of the total lunar eclipse back in November of 2022, and there were a lot of clouds, so I would still just try your best if you can, but you can use any camera that you have. For just the moon in frame at a modest zoom, you can use a lens of 300 millimeters or so for an APS-C size camera, or if you have a full frame, you can use something like around 450 millimeters. The thing is, you are going to need a tripod more than likely, at least to stabilize your shots. And because the Earth is rotating and the moon is moving, you want to make sure that you don't have any sort of blur in your images. So your shutter speed is going to be really important if you're not using a star tracker. Now, before the eclipse, when the moon is fully bright, here are some settings to use. Now, around 50 to 75% of the partial eclipse, you're going to want to up your ISO. Now during totality, it's going to become very, very dim, so you're going to want to up your ISO significantly. Now you are going to get more noise with higher ISO settings, but it's kind of just a trade-off. And then as the moon goes through its partial phase again, as well as the penumbral phase, just follow the steps from before. You can also bracket your shots if you're more of a seasoned photographer, or you could do a time lapse, but time lapses are also pretty tricky. So just try your best and, just kind of use these settings at a base. Now on March 29th, we have a new moon, which also coincides with a partial solar eclipse. Now, a partial solar eclipse happens when the moon passes between the Earth and the sun, but they don't necessarily line up perfectly. So only a portion of the sun is going to be covered by the moon's shadow. So this kind of results in what looks like the sun getting a big chunk taken out of it, almost kind of like this cosmic cookie, if you will. So when it comes to a partial solar eclipse, or anything other than a total solar eclipse's totality phase, you cannot look up at the sun directly without proper eye protection. And if you're going to be photographing this event, then you have to have a solar filter for your camera lens or your telescope. So who's going to be lucky enough to see the partial solar eclipse? So it is going to be visible from parts of northern Canada, Greenland, the Arctic, parts of Europe, and including parts of Russia. But again, to check the visibility of your location, check out timeanddate.com or use something like Sky Safari or Stellarium, or check out NASA's Eclipse website. Now, if you're trying to photograph this event, make sure that you use a solar filter. And just like with photographing the moon, you can use something around 300 millimeters or longer for detailed shots. You might want to try out ISO 100 with an aperture of f8 to f16 for sharpness. And then shutter speed is going to kind of depend, but I would highly recommend just bracketing, kind of like with the total lunar eclipse suggestions. Otherwise, I would definitely recommend trying out a time lapse so that you can create a really beautiful sequence showing that progression of the eclipse. Now, twice a year, something really extraordinary happens, where the sun rises due east and it sets due west. And this is called the equinox. But for this time of year, it's called the March equinox, and it's an astronomical event that marks the beginning of spring in the northern hemisphere and autumn in the southern hemisphere. But what exactly is the March equinox? Well, it occurs when the sun is directly above the Earth's equator, illuminating both hemispheres equally. This perfect balance results in nearly equal day and night across the globe, and it's a reminder of the planet's delicate dance with the sun. Now, throughout history, cultures around the world have paid homage to this celestial event. For example, in Mexico, the Pyramid of El Castillo at Chichen Itza casts a shadow that resembles a serpent slithering down its steps. Today, the March equinox continues to inspire celebrations. In Japan, it signals the blooming of cherry blossoms. Now, you may have noticed that the sky is changing a little bit up there during the night. So every spring, from around late February to early March, the Milky Way's core begins its grand reappearance in the northern hemisphere, where it starts as this really faint glow on the southeastern horizon just before dawn. And it's going to gradually rise higher, becoming more visible as the nights grow shorter. And by midsummer, it's going to dominate the southern sky. Now, if you're a deep space imager in the northern hemisphere, then March kind of signals the start of galaxy season. So during this time of year, the Earth's nighttime side faces away from the dense plane of the Milky Way. Instead of peering through clouds of dust and gas, we kind of get this clearer view of the vast cosmos and beyond, specifically around 9 o'clock till later. So if you are in the northern hemisphere, I would recommend starting off with the Leo triplet, which is going to be a great target if you are looking for a wide field kind of composition. And it contains 3 visible galaxies. Now, for some deep field imaging in the northern hemisphere, anywhere between 500 millimeters to 2,000 millimeters of focal length, I would recommend the Whirlpool Galaxy or the Headphone Nebula, which is a really cool planetary nebula. If you're in the southern hemisphere and it's not really galaxy season, well, you can still check out the Large Magellanic Cloud, or LMC for short. And this one is cool because you can image it with a lot of different focal lengths from very wide to very deep. And then we also have the Fighting Dragons of Ara, NGC 6188, which is an absolutely stunning area of the night sky, and this is going to be perfect for narrowband filters such as HA and O3, or creating a really cool SHO image where S2 or sulfur 2 is in the red channel, HA or hydrogen alpha is mapped to the green channel, and O3 or oxygen 3 mapped to the blue channel. This is called the Hubble palette, and it's very, very popular. So when it comes to photographing galaxies, they are considered broadband targets, so you'd be photographing light from across the visible light spectrum, which means that it's important to photograph it in darker conditions, so less light pollution. So go somewhere away from city lights, try to image them during a new moon, which again is going to be on March 29th this month. But if you are going to be in light pollution, you can just use kind of your traditional light pollution filter. Now next month we have one of the best meteor showers of the year happening, which is going to be really cool. So, you know, subscribe if you would like. And until the next video, I hope you all have clear skies.